Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw, and I'm here in Brisbane, Australia, on a wonderful fam trip with some great travel advisors. I'm here with Cassie Saunders, who is a guide with Black Card Cultural Tours. And there's another side to Brisbane, and we're going to talk about that. It's really an exploration of the history of Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples here. And Cassie gives a great tour, and we're going to talk to her about that tour and a whole lot more on Insider Travel Report. Now, Cassie, we just finished up your tour, and first of all, tell us a little bit about Black Card Cultural Tours.
Okay, so the business name is called the Black Card. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been around for about 9 years, and in the last 5 years we've branched out into the tourism sector with these tours. So this tour is all about art. So basically we look at different installations that have been done around the area by Indigenous artists and non-Indigenous artists, and basically we activate those and we share the story that belongs to that.
Yeah, so in fact we started in the museum here, this center, and you showed us all these different areas where there's actually a surprising amount of old photos, art exhibits, things like that, all have to do with Indigenous people here in Australia, right?
Yes, and they're all sort of hidden away. So people that come on the tour have said before that, you know, they've been in those spaces before but never realised that they were there. So, yeah.
And then we finally walked outside here, and actually we stopped at this wonderful, really sculpture. I'm not sure this is Indigenous people, but it's a marvelous sculpture of this. What would you call it?
The piece is called When the World Turns, but the main side of this piece is actually on the other side of the elephant's head, which is the little Kurilpa. This area actually gets its name from that. So yeah.
So then you took us along the river here, the Brisbane River, which is really spectacular, and you pointed to all these different sites, which there are different art pieces and installations that tell us about the Indigenous people, right?
Yes. So here in Australia, the history with the Aboriginal people and, white Australia isn't really a good one. So it can be quite confronting to some people.
Yeah, you told us some rather shocking stories about, how Indigenous people were treated even up until the 1980s, right?
Yeah. So some of this stuff is still quite recent, but I always say to people that, it's a good way for us to educate people on our culture and our history through art because it's not too confronting. And I believe it's a good way to showcase, exactly what, has happened to us and stuff like that.
Well, I do know that the past few years and before the pandemic, Australia tourism was really very focused on providing opportunities to Indigenous people, companies, and they were supporting companies and properties and hotels that were owned by Indigenous people and operated. So it's something that's come about in the last, 10 years, 15 years? Right?
And what's really good is Accor, which is one of the big hotel chains here, is one of our big clients on the training side of things. But since they've done the training, the different processes and things that they've put in place, like just simply having, the acknowledgement, the little wording for the acknowledgement and, the welcome to countries and things like that.
Yeah, we talked about, we all had to tell our story about where we're from, and you told your story, and it is, although your story is not originally from here, it's from some of the South, right?
Yeah, so even though I'm born and bred here in Brisbane, my family actually is from southwest here, so about 6 hours down the highway, a place called St. George. So I'm a freshwater Murray, which is what we are called here in what we call Aboriginal people here in Queensland. So, you have different, so if you go to New South Wales and Melbourne, you have the Kooris, and then in South Australia and, you have the Nunga people, and then on Western Australia you have the Noongar people, and Northern Territory are the Yolngu people. So yeah, there's a lot of different mobs around the country. So
actually, we started this trip in Cairns, and there was actually a center for training for Indigenous people, and we also met a wonderful artist who is great. I'm trying to remember his name right now, but it was just really an education about it. He was so fascinating. And do you think this education that and this training, and also the guides that you do, the tours that you do, is really helping both people here in Australia and people abroad understand what's happening and maybe improving the lot of Aboriginal people?
Yeah, I believe it is, because a lot of, as I mentioned, our history is something that was sort of a bit shameful. So it's not something that's openly talked about, at the dinner table or anything like that. So, we here in Australia, we have, the Aboriginal people that belong to the mainland of Australia, and then you have the Torres Strait Islander people who are the second Indigenous people that belong to this country, and they belong up near Thursday Island, Torres Strait Islands, which are up near Cairns. So we have that aspect. We have a Torres Strait Islander facilitator in our workshops as well, so people will come and do the workshop and don't even realise that there's a second Indigenous group that belongs to the country. So I think it's an eye-opener for some people, because not a lot of this stuff is taught in our schools. So it's a good way to sort of, get people, to educate them and hopefully sort of click that button in their head where they actually want to start their journey and learn a little bit more. So like we always encourage people, like the acknowledgement process, like even just doing that, we do that before we jump in the car and we're driving out to go home. We always acknowledge, our elders and just make sure that our ancestors look after us on that trip. So yeah.
Well, it's funny because a lot of Americans do know about the Aboriginal people, but they probably don't know that the mistreatment of Indigenous peoples went on until the 80s. I mean, we have our own issues in the U.S. with African Americans and also other ethnic minorities, and there is a movement afoot in the U.S. to do the same, to acknowledge what was done and slavery and things like this. But I was actually surprised to hear from you that young women and girls were actually put into basically homes that were supposed to be good for them, but not necessarily so. Right?
No, definitely not good. And the thing was, and it's little things like that people aren't fully aware of or that don't know, because some of that stuff is a little bit haunting as well. So, even that, that's still a bit confronting for me, even though I have to tell that story, because, as a female and just thinking like, I couldn't imagine if anything in being in a place like that. So, yeah. It
is different. And in fact, you tell it, you were in front of a sculpture that somebody did to acknowledge this horrible situation, and then you tell the story of what that sculpture means. Right?
Yeah, yep. And that one, as I said, there were two parts to that piece too. So, they talk about, a lot of it talks about the stolen generation. So stolen generation, they say started, in the early 1900s, but, it started back in the late 1800s. So, yeah.
So we go out to about, as I said earlier to you, that we have about 100,000 travel advisors in the U.S. What would you tell them to tell their clients about booking one of your tours and understanding this better and what they're going to come away with?
I would definitely, if you're definitely coming to Brisbane, I would recommend it. It's something for you to put on your to-do list. When we travel around the country, we always whatever area we're in, we'll look up, what the local sort of cultural tour is to, so we can learn about that area as well. But I'd always say to people, it's a good idea to do it. It's 90 minutes of your time, so it's not, too long, and we don't walk that far. So, sometimes when you say walking tour, people think you're gonna, you're doing a 5K walk, but we're not. So, but yeah, especially if you want more information about Australia's history and Aboriginal history, I definitely recommend you come along and book one. Yeah.
Now, where can travel advisors go to learn more about your company?
So you can go to our website, which is www.theblackcard.com.au, and there is a little bar on the sidebar. You can actually go and click on the cultural tours. So at the moment we offer two cultural tours. So one is the Meanjin tour, so that actually starts over in Brisbane City over here at the back of us, and then we have the Kurilpa tour, which starts over this side. So we also have another experience, which is a 3-hour experience, and which is more of a women's a women's experience, because what we do is we do a walking tour, and then we have a bush tucker tasting for lunch. And then one of my sister girls is actually a weaver. She does Aboriginal weaving, so she comes and does a 90-minute weaving session. So we're doing that, and then also we might be. I thought about this in the last couple of days, but in Roma Street Parklands, they actually have a bush tucker trail. So I think that might be another thing that we add, that will be added to the books, because, bush tucker is another thing that people, want to learn about, and it's a good way, to share things through food as well.
That sounds great. And of course, food is everything these days, and people love it. But if nothing else, you come, you learn about the situation with Indigenous people, and you have a nice walk along the river, because it's been a beautiful day here in Brisbane, and it came to me as a major surprise and a good one to find out all about Indigenous people, Aboriginal people in Australia through you and the stories you tell about them, and you come away knowing, understanding it, and through understanding, we hopefully will in the future solve these situations.
Yeah. Right? Yes. So last week here in Australia, it was Reconciliation Week. So it was quite a big week for us on the tours. But, we talk about reconciliation and how we can move forward. So, it's not about, obviously there were some terrible things that happened in our history. There's no blame game. We don't want to blame anybody for what's happened. It's more about, understanding what happened and acknowledging that, and just like going, well, that really was no good what happened to you. How do we, all come together and move forward? So, hopefully, I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but, hopefully when my sons get older, hopefully in their lifetime, that we might be closer to reconciling the country. Yeah.
Absolutely, and also you gain knowledge about the rich culture and background and history of Indigenous peoples, and we all know about the Aborigines we hear, which is we associate with Australia, but we don't really know the full story. And thanks to you, we know a lot more about it. Thank you, Cassie. I want to thank you for taking the time and giving us this wonderful tour, and hopefully we can send some more customers your way to better understand this wonderful culture and its history.
No worries, that sounds really deadly.
I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.